all the Gemara is interesting, but I want to discuss today. Once we conclude a shtickle Gemara, I want to talk about the implications of this halacha l'maisa. Okay, and we'll get to that, and I'll show you the sources, and at the end, I will probably conclude by telling you, ask your local competent rabbi for what you should personally do. But I'll show you what it says in the Biur Halacha, Mishnah Berurah, and so on. Okay, we're going to start a little bit before where we're up to, a little bit higher up, a drop just from Mamtana. We have basically quoted the ruling of Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar said that if somebody immersed into the mikveh and he comes out of the mikveh without having any intention, so once he's out of the mikveh, so long as he's still wet, it doesn't say that here, but that's the implication. While he's still wet, he's able to still make a decision and have an intention for which level of kedusha he wanted to have this immersion apply for. We challenge that. Because we have a brisa that says that if a person still has 1 foot in the water, then if he had an intention for something that is less stringent, he's able to change his mind. But once he comes out of the mikvah, he's not able to change from one level to another level. And so we would assume that means he cannot do anything once he's out of the mikvah. However, we responded to that challenge by saying, no, that when it says you cannot change anything once you come out of the mikvah, it means you cannot change from one level to another level because you've already decided upon that. But it doesn't mean that had you gone into the mikvah and not had any intention whatsoever, that you couldn't establish an intention once you came out of the mikvah. So now we are asking the question, who is the Tana of this Mishnah that says that while you have your foot still in the mikvah, you can still change your mind? Now, what's important to remember for this is that from the outset, we need to understand that it is assumed, correctly so, that whoever has this opinion that while your foot is still in the mikvah, you can change your mind, applies the rule of good achis, which means that we draw down the top to the bottom, so the water that is on your head is still and on your body is still connected to the pool of water in the mikvah. So that's the assumption. So let's do it inside. Right, the Gemara.
Where were we?
Oh, sorry. Man Tana, who is the Tana of our Mishnah that taught a day raglib achas b'mayim, that if a person still has 1 foot in the water, and that it's regarded as if he's still in the water and therefore he can change his mind. Amar Reb Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda we must say that this Mishnah goes according to Rabbi Yehuda, and he's the Tana of our Mishnah. Why? Because I'll bring you a proof from somewhere else. The Tana we've learned in another Mishnah, it says, Mikvah shenim dad, a mikvah that has been measured. And it has 40 saw that was exact. So now, two people are going to immerse themselves in the mikvah, one after the other. So the first guy goes in, and the second guy waits for the first guy to come out. But before he's completely out, the question is, does the guy who now immersed in as the second person still count? So the halacha we say, according to the Mishnah, is Harishon Tohar V'Hasheni Tomei, that the first guy is Tohar and the second guy is Tomei because he's taken out some of the water, which makes it no longer a kosher mikvah. This is the view of the Tanna Kama. Okay, so which means to say the Tanna Kama really doesn't differentiate between whether the first guy stayed in or not. As long as you went to the mikvah and you left the mikvah, and your body took some of the water out with you, whether you still have a foot in or whether you don't have a foot in, the second guy's immersion does not count. That's according to the Tanna Kama. However, Amar Rabbi Yehuda says, Im ho yuraglov shel rishon, nogis b'mayim, if the feet of the first guy was still touching the water, was still touching the water, then we say, af hasheni tahar, that the second guy's immersion provides him with tahara, he becomes pure. So what do we see from here? According to Reb Das, this shows us that it is Rabbi Yehuda who has the opinion that the water from above can connect with the water from below. And so he must be the Tana of the Mishnah that says that while your foot is still in the water, you can change your intention from one level of stringency to another, because it's still considered as if you're in the mikvah. Now, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba Bavua. Nachman said in the name of Rabba Bavua, when you just quoted this last Mishnah, this Mishnah machloikis b'mailas d'Rabbanon. This is a dispute only in reference to the heightened standards of the rabbis. In other words, it's only in a time where the Chachamim, they were the ones that obligated a person and said that you need to go into a mikvah, not because the Torah says so, but because we say so. So, for example, an oinen, somebody whose father passed away, right? Or somebody and hasn't yet been buried, or somebody who's lacking atonement, right? Mechusa Kippurim. So we say by rabbinic decree they need to go into the mikvah. So we're talking about two people that need to go into the mikvah for a rabbinic decree that they need a mikvah. Then there's a machlekes between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda whether or not keeping your foot in attaches the top water to the bottom water. Avol mituma l'tahara. But if you're talking about real tuma tahara, meaning to say that is biblical in nature, then divrei hako, and then according to everybody, then av hasheni tame, the second guy is going to be tame. Why? Because this whole idea of good achis, right? When would we apply it? Only when we're trying to purify you for an extra stringency of the rabbis. But when it comes to something biblical, we're not going to apply this idea of good achis in this case. According to this version of what Reb Nachman said in the name of Rabba Bavua, then this works with Reb Pdus. That what? That according to the Chachamim, a person cannot connect the top waters with the bottom waters. Therefore, we're only left with Rabbi Yehuda as the candidate to be the Tana of the other Mishnah, which says that while his foot is still in the water, he can change his mind. However, there is another version of how Reb Nachman explained this in the name of Rabbi Avua. In other words, how he explained the machlekes of the Mishnah. Those who say, Omar Reb Nachman, Omar Rabbi Avua. Reb Nachman said in the name of Rabbi Avua, this machlekes between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yehuda is machlekes b'tumah tahara. That's only with regards to a dispute about biblical Tumah Tahara. Then is when the Chachamim disagree with Rabbi Yehuda and they say you cannot use good achis. But if we're talking about extra stringencies from the Rabbanon, that the Rabbanon enacted it, then we would say that divrei hako af hasheni tor. Then we would say that according to everybody, even the Chachamim would agree that the second guy is tar. In which case, if that's what Rabbi Nachman really said in the name of Rabbi Avahu, then Then Rabbi Nachman's statement disagrees with Rabbi Pudus, and he's basically saying that the Mishnah doesn't have to be Rabbi Yehuda; it could even be the Chachamim, because the Chachamim came along and said that in a case where it's only an extra stringency of the rabbis, then the top water and the bottom water can still connect, and therefore they could be the authors of the brisa that says that if his feet are still in the water, he can change his mind. Okay, so now what we can establish from this is whether you say it's Rabbi Yehuda or whether you say it's the Chachamim, right? Depending on which kirsa you say, but it comes out from Rabbi Yehuda that he holds of good achis. Good achis, as I said, means you attach the top to the bottom, that the water on the top of the person's body is still connected through his body to the bottom waters. So we believe in it drawing down. So Ula said, Boy Minei, Rabbi Yochanan, I inquired of Rabbi Yochanan that he said, Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda, right? What would the law be as far as immersing needles and spinning forks on the head of the first person? In other words, good achis, Islay Rabbi Yehuda, do we say, as we've already established, that good achis, the idea of drawing it lower, the top, that you extend it lower, that Rabbi Yehuda does accept. But good asik, Leslie, but the idea of extending and raising, meaning if I want the needles that are going into the hair of this guy to have a valid immersion, I would have to adopt the principle of good asik. So do we say that Rabbi Yehuda accepts this idea of good asik, that the water from below will now rise upwards imaginarily, so but they would rise upwards and connect to the water in the hair, and thereby have 40 saw, and those needles will now become tar. Or Dilma, perhaps good asik nami islay. So do we say that he does accept it, or do we say that he doesn't, that good asik he does not accept? And for the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan answered Ula, and he said to him, Tinisua, you've learned it from a brisa. In other words, I'm going to prove to you the answer from a brisa. What does the brisa say? It says as follows. There were 3 holes containing water on the slope of a valley, right? Now, you have a stream of water that's going down this slope, but within this slope, there are 3 holes, 3 like grooves, okay? Now, in these grooves, they have all this water that is being collected and staying in one place. Because if you remember before, we said that some rainwater, as it comes down a slope, it's not okay. Why? Because rainwater, it has to be bashboren, it has to be in one place. So if you just have water flowing down, it's not going to be good. However, if it's all collected in one place, then it's considered a proper mikvah. Now we have a problem. We have a mikvah on the top, meaning a groove on the top, and we have a groove in the bottom, and we have a groove in the middle. So what's the story? So he says like this: you have an upper groove, a lower groove, and a middle groove, right? And each one of them has a certain amount of water. So which one has which? So we say the upper one and the lower one have 20 saw, so they themselves do not contain enough, right? But the middle one shall have by himself. But the middle one has 40 saw, which is enough. So now, if they were just separated, then there's nothing connecting them, then we would say the middle one's kosher, the top one's not kosher, the bottom one's not kosher. But what we have over here, is the chardolis shel gshamim overes b'neihem. You have a torrent of rainwater that passes between them, and so now it's connecting them all. It's connecting them all. So the question we're going to have is, which mikvah do we say is kosher? The mikvah in the middle, everybody says is kosher, right? But the question is, what about the upper one and the lower one? If I come along and I apply the principle of good achis and not good asik, which means I extend it downwards, but I don't extend it upwards, then only the bottom mikvah is going to be kosher. But only the bottom mikvah is going to be kosher because we're connecting the 40 saw mikvah to the 20 saw mikvah below it. But if I also say good asik, that I can extend upwards, then I would say that the 40 saw mikvah, the middle mikvah, can extend upwards to the upper one, and then that would also be kosher. So now let's look. Rabbi Yehuda says, Meir hoya oimer. This is Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir used to say, Mat bilbel yoina, that one may immerse in the upper one. Why? Because we do apply this idea of good asik. Now, Rabbi Yochanan is telling Ula, here I have a brisa where Rabbi Yehuda is quoting Rabbi Meir, but he doesn't seem to be disputing him because he just leaves it with this is what Meir used to say, that the mikveh on top is kosher. So therefore, it seems that the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda is that you also assume good asik, that you extend upwards and not just good achis. Okay. However, this is why we have students, because sometimes the students catch you out, and that's how you learn more. We say that from your students you learn the most. So Ula turns around to Rabbi Yechon and he says, Tanya, but isn't there another brisa that says more information? Rabbi Yehuda says, right? Here we go over to Daf Yud Tes Amud Beis. Meir used to say that you can immerse things in the upper one. But Rabbi Yehuda says, and I say that no, that you can only immerse in the lower one and not in the higher one. So we see from this that Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with Rabbi Meir. So the proof that Rabbi Yechanan brought just a moment ago is no good, because here we have a brisa that contradicts that and says that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't agree with Rabbi Meir. So Amalei, so Rabbi Yechanan says, Tanya. If that's what was taught, then that what was taught. In other words, I retract my point because I wasn't aware of this brisa. Now that you've mentioned to me that there's a clear brisa that Rabbi Yehuda says that he disagrees with Rabbi Meir, so then the answer to your question is that he does not hold good asik. He does not hold good asik. Okay, that's the end of this shtickle. 1 second. Okay, so before I go any further, I want to talk a little bit about the laws of Netilas Yadayim. Why? Because from this Mishnah, it seems that that Netilas Yadayim does not need kavana, right? We brought two brises that seem to contradict each other. One said you do need to wash, you need to have kavana for chulin, and another seems to say that you don't. And so we answered that no, one was for chulin and one was for ma'aser sheni. But it seems then that that you don't need to have kavana. And we tried to ask, where do we know this from? Where do we know that when you're washing hands for chulin, you don't need to have kavana? So we said we tried to bring the proof from the wave that detached itself, and we knocked that off, and we said that that wasn't a good proof because the guy had intention. Then we went to the idea of the channel of the water, where there was a fruit immersed in the water, and you put your hands in and you didn't have in mind, and we say that the person's hands became tar, and that seems to be conclusive proof from our Gemara, right? That's conclusive proof from our Gemara that you don't need to have intention for Netilas Yadayim for chulin, right? So now it seems, and the rest of the next part of the Mishnah dealt with when a person immerses and he didn't have in mind, right? We tried to say that it's as if he didn't immerse at all, but we ultimately concluded that no, it's just not good for ma'aser sheni, but for chulin it is good. So what's mashma from all of this is, bottom line, when I wash my hands for bread, it seems I should not need to have kavana, and it should be a good washing of the hands. So the Beis Yosef brings down in Orach Chaim Siman Kuf Nun Tes, right? He says that it seems that the das of most of the poskim is that you do not need to have kavana. However, he quotes from the Rashba in Teres Habayis that he holds that it seems that you do need to have kavana, and he brings it to Sefta, where it talks about if a person either he himself had in mind when somebody else washed him, or the person that was washing him had in mind, even though he didn't have in mind, then it's okay. But if not, then it's not okay. And there's a machlekes over there. Rabbi Yossi said that it's not okay and they're supposed to have. But the point is, it seems that even according to the Chachamim, you need to at least have one person having intention when your hands are being washed. And without that, the washing doesn't count. It seems, right? And I'm going to quote. I'm going to bring the source over here. Give me a second. No, where is it? Why isn't this working? 1 second. Give me a minute. Okay, yeah, here it is. Okay, so let me try and share this. Okay, does everybody see it? Yeah. You got it? So this is Shulchan Aruch, Orach Chaim, Siman Kuf Nun Tes, Sif Yud Gimel. It says, according to the Shulchan Aruch, Lechatchila, Yechaven HaNotel Lenatila, the person who's washing his hands has to have in mind Lechatchila for washing Hamachsheres Lachila, that makes you now prepared to eat. In other words, that your hands are now going to become purified. Now, the Ramah over here mentions the kavanos noisen nami moil, the intention of the person who's pouring on your hands. If he has intention, even if you didn't have intention, it also works. Afilu lechatchila, even in the first instance, afilu shlei kiven hanetel klal, even if the guy who's actually his hands are being washed, he didn't have intention at all. So that is what it says in the Shulchan Aruch from the Ramah, that a person should have intention lechatchila, but it sounds like b'diavad, if you didn't, it's still okay. However, that is not the opinion of everybody, because 1 second, let me go to the next one. This is 1 second. Yeah, I know. I hate when this happens. Okay, here you go. I'm sorry. Okay, open it. And let's close this. This is, okay, here you go. Let me share this. So this is from the Bir Halacha, on that halacha, so where it says that initially you should have in mind, it says in the Mishnah Berurah, see in the Mishnah Berurah, when a person doesn't have any other water, in other words, a person didn't have in mind, and his hands have been washed, right? So what should he do, right? When there's no other water, it says if he has no water, then l'chayra it should be okay. V'im yesh lo mayim, but if he has water, mashma merama, it seems from the Ramah le'ils v'simu kuf nun chestiv zayin, in the paragraph of kuf nun chestiv zayin, the tzorich little yod hashenis, you do have to go back and wash your hands again. V'hainu kedei lotzes das harashba, that's in order to fulfill your obligation, even in accordance with the Rashba. Ella, but the lo yivarich, you should not make a bracha, because there's a suffix over here. Other poskim, most of the poskim, don't agree with the Rashba that you need to wash again. So therefore, you should not make a bracha, because we have this idea of suffix brachas lahakil. When you're in doubt whether you need to make a bracha or not, we do not go back and make a bracha. This is also applied, by the way, with regards to Sfiras Omer that we're coming up to soon, that if a person forgets to count Sfiras Omer by night, and he counts it the next day, so he continues counting without a bracha. Why do you continue counting without a bracha? Even though there are opinions that it's still a mitzvah to count every day. And the answer is because there are opinions that it's only a mitzvah, bisman hazeh, if you're counting the days and the weeks. But if you're not counting the days and the weeks because you've missed a day, right? So therefore, they say that it's no longer a mitzvah, bisman hazeh, to count the Sfiras Omer. Even though there are other opinions that say you do, but because it depends on a machlokes, so now there's a suffix whether you should make a bracha or not. And we say the principle suffix brachos lahakil. When there's a doubt whether you should make a bracha or not, then we are lenient and we don't make a bracha so as not to say Hashem's name in vain. Va'ayin sham b'Magen Avraham. So see over there in the Magen Avraham, hatam, the reason why you should make a bracha. The shema kvayotza, maybe you have already fulfilled your obligation, like the Re'eh, and those that agree with the Re'eh that you don't have to make a bracha. But here's how he concludes. V'nireh, it seems to me, the toiv, that it's better, sheyitame yodov, that you should go back and you should make your hands impure, so that now you'd obligated for sure to wash your hands a second time, and you should be able to make a bracha. So it seems that what comes out of all of this is, although from our Gemara it's mashma that a person does not have to wash their hands. However, does not have to have kavanah when they wash their hands. However, there's the Rashba who comes along and says you do have to. And what does he do with our Gemara? He says that our Gemara is not talking about eating. He says our Gemara is talking about touching and preparing. But if our Gemara were talking about eating, then it would also require you to have kavanah, although the Beis Yosef doesn't seem to accept that. But nevertheless, out of respect to the Rashba, it seems that one should be suspect to the opinion of the Rashba, and therefore, anytime you wash your hands, you need to have kavanah that the reason why you're washing your hands is for this tahara, and if you didn't, you should go and you should wash your hands again for sure. The only question is whether you should make a bracha or not. If you want to make a bracha, then first go and make your hands impure for sure, go to the bathroom or whatever it might be, and then you wash again, and then you can make a bracha for sure. So that's something that is negei lahalacha every single day when it comes to washing your hands for something that we're required to, like for example, washing for bread. You have to have in mind, and if you didn't have in mind, it's best to wash again. And the best thing is to invalidate the first washing so that you would have to make a bracha for the second. Any questions before we move on? Let me just see something over here. It seems from the Alter Rebbe, in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch Harav, it says over here, on Atilas Yadayim, it says, let me just, 1, 2, 3, 4 lines down, the last 3 words. On Atilas Yadayim, tzricha kavana l'shem natila. Washing your hands needs to have kavana for the purpose of washing hamachsheres lachila, that makes it now prepared for eating. The ein tzarich lema, and we don't even have to mention im natal yodav sheloi lechol. If you only wash your hands not to eat, just for cleaning your hands, because your hands were actually physically dirty, and so therefore you washed your hands in the appropriate manner, but you didn't have in mind to wash for bread, and then afterwards nimlach, you changed your mind to go and eat bread. You certainly have to go back and wash your hands. But nevertheless, according to the Alter Rebbe, you should not make a bracha over this washing if you didn't avert your mind from the original washing. The fishi Hashem, because there are those who say shenatilas yadayim and tzricha kavana. There are those who their opinions that hold that when you wash your hands you don't have to have kavana or sofik brachas lahakil, and therefore when it comes to doubt when making brachas, then we are lenient. Shema also le'natila harishona. Perhaps the first washing was actually valid. And for over the first washing, you cannot make a bracha, because when we washed the first time that we're speaking about, either whether it was washing just for the sake of making your hands clean, you can't make a bracha on that at all, because it wasn't even for the purpose of bread. And so he compares it to a nida that fell into water and became purified from a tumah, that she doesn't make a bracha on this tevila when she comes up. And the reason why she doesn't make a bracha is because she didn't have in mind, even though it does work, but nevertheless, since she didn't have in mind, so therefore you don't make a bracha. Anyway, that is the way the poskim decide on this matter. And like I said, with regards to what you should actually do, contact your local competent Orthodox rabbi and ask him how to paskin. Okay, let's go a little bit further in the Gemara. We mentioned in the Mishnah, it says, any questions? I'm sorry, I I just moved on, but unless there are any questions, okay, so let's move on then. We said in the Mishnah, somebody who immerses himself for chulin, and his intention was only for chulin, then what did we say? It's prohibited for him to now touch ma'aser sheni, eat ma'aser sheni, etc., because the kedusha that he drew upon himself was only enough for the thing that he had intention for. Again, this is Exer of the Rabbanon. The Gemara, Mani Mas Nisin. Who is the author of our Mishnah? Who's the Tana of our Mishnah that rules this way? And for the Gemara, Rabbanon, it's the Rabbanon. The Rabbanon are the ones who hold that if you immersed for chulin, it's not good for ma'aser sheni. The shani lehu bein chulin lemaisa. They are the ones who, if you remember from the Mishnah on Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis, where we said that they make a difference between chulin and maisa. If you remember, we brought a Mishnah from Parshas Para that we said that there were certain things that applied to truma and bikurim, right? That didn't apply to chulin and ma'aser sheni, and there was a machlikas there between Rameh and the Rabbanon were the ones who said there's even a distinction between ma'aser sheni and chulin, whereas Rameh said there's no distinction between ma'aser sheni and chulin. So it seems that the ones who come along and say in our Mishnah that when you immerse for chulin, it doesn't count for ma'aser sheni, that seems to be the opinion of the Rabbanon. So they must be the authors of the Mishnah, which is
Rabbi,
fantastic. Yes.
Rabbi, over here, when it says shani lahu, is that you're saying that the shani means they differentiate?
Yeah. Like shinu.
I thought that the word was shani, but with an aleph, and when it's not an aleph, it means to teach.
One second. I hear you. I don't know. This is the way they translate it here in the Art Scroll, and this is how it made sense to me, because when it says Bein Chulin Lamaisa, right? The shani lahu bein chulin l'maisa, that they make a difference. They make a difference between chulin and l'maisa. I'm not sure. I can, Be'ezus Hashem, see if there's anybody that comments on this, and whether there's another way to translate it. But this is the way I understood it when I was learning it. So
okay,
sorry.
No problem.
But
I'm just trying to understand the Aramaic. That's
right. But so you know, I found many times that you can have certain words that are interpreted and translated differently depending on the context. In other words, the context is the one that gives away how to translate it. And sometimes it can be translated one way, and sometimes it can be translated another way. So I'm not sure if that applies here.
Or could be spelled, and they sound the same, but are spelled differently.
Right.
Okay.
So he says like this. We've just now established that who are the authors of our Mishnah? The authors of our Mishnah are the Rabbanan, right? Because they they distinguish the difference between chulin and ma'aser sheni, right? However, Emasefa, let's go and look at the end of the Mishnah. It says in the end of the Mishnah that what? Big day Amoretz, Midrash Leprushin, the clothing of an Amoretz is considered to be Tomei through a Midrash for Perushin. Big day Perushin, Midrash La'ichle Truma, the clothing of Perushin is considered Tomei through Midrash for those who are eating Truma. And so what we see over here is that the fact that we do not mention the level of Ma'aser Sheni, it skips Ma'aser Sheni altogether. It basically goes from Chulin to Truma, right? So it must be that also Remeya, that this end of the Mishnah must go in accordance to Remeya, because he doesn't distinguish between Chulin and Ma'aser Sheni. So we have a bit of a problem. You have the Reisha, the beginning of the Mishnah goes according to the Chacham who do distinguish, and the end of the Mishnah seems to be that since we skip a step and we don't mention any difference between Chulin and Ma'aser Sheni, that it follows Remeya. right? The Amma that he says Chulin or Ma'aser Kahadodininu, he maintains that Chulin and Ma'aser Sheni are the same, and so therefore, since it's the same standards of Tahara, there would be no idea of a midras step between Chulin and Truma. It's just both the same. So Reisha Rabbanon v'Sefer Emeya, it seems that the first part of the Mishnah is the Chachamim, and the later part is Rav Mishnah. Is that taka the case? And for the Gemara that's correct. That what? Reisha Rabbanon, the beginning of the Mishnah goes according to the view of the Rabbanon, the Sefer Emeya, and the end of the Mishnah goes in accordance with Rabbi Meir. Now, there's another girsa where our Mishnah is understood and taught differently. Rav Acha bar Adar masna leib sefer chomesh mailos, that he has a version of our Mishnah which has not 4 levels but 5 levels, including the Ma'aser Sheni, and so therefore, according to that version, so he is a mukila kula Rabbanon, and so therefore he establishes the whole Mishnah according to the Rabbanon, saying that there is a difference between Kulin and Ma'aser Sheni, and it's reflected in the fact that there are 5 levels, not 4 levels. So that's the end of that shtickle. Now we need to do a little bit of chazara, and that is on what we said about how far can something that has become tamei, can it pass it on further? And we said the Chachamim instituted stringency upon stringency depending on what it is that we're looking at. So when it comes to truma, for example, we say truma can only passel a shlishi, but it does not go further to ervi. And likewise, a chulin, we say, can only go to a sheni, but cannot go further to a shlishi. So we want to know right now, we're going to explore this idea of somebody who took chulin and he prepared it with the level of Taras HaKodesh. We want to know whether this chulin, because it was prepared in the level of Taras HaKodesh, that it does pass on Tumah like Kodesh does further. Or do we say, no, it wasn't, it was Chulin, it wasn't Kodesh, and so since it was Chulin, we'd never go along and say that it can go past what Chulin can affect in terms of passing on the Tumah. So let's do it inside. Omer Rabbi Mori, Rav Mori said, Shema Mina, let us learn from our Mishnah that chulin shenasu al taras hakodesh, chulin that was prepared according to the Torah standard of kodesh, kodesh dom, going to be kodesh, is going to be considered to be kodesh. Now let's look at Rashi. It's an important Rashi to help us understand why a person would even do this. Why would a person want to have all of his food to be prepared and protected on the level of Kodesh? So Rashi says, the last Rashi on the page, says Rashi, we're talking about a guy who regularly eats food that is kachim, like from a carbon. So what does he want? He wants to make sure that all the food that he's ever going to be bringing home, right, that he's going to be eating, should always be on the level of kachim. So therefore, Makabel, all he accepts upon himself, and obviously when he accepts it for himself, he's accepting it for himself and for his family, right? Lechol chulin v'taras hakodesh, to eat chulin also on the level of taras hakodesh. Because again, if you want somebody, you want somebody to get into the habit of something, right? You have to get them to repeat it over and over and over and over again. So you tell a kid before he crosses the street, stop, look, and listen. Even if there are no cars coming, stop, look, and listen. Why? Because you want them to get into the habit of always being careful when they cross the street. So over here, we're saying every bit of food that is prepared in this house is going to be prepared, even chulin is going to be prepared and guarded on the level of Taras HaKodesh. So that his whole family, right, the members of his family should be careful, and they should be experts, meaning well-versed in what it means to protect something on the level of the holiness of Kodesh. So,
Rabbi,
yes.
is this only applicable to a Kohen
It seems so, unless a person would have the custom to bring shlomim every day, right, or very often. So shlomim you're allowed to bring, and you partake in it, and you have to be pure on the level of kodesh to be able to eat it. So if he would be bringing shlomim often, then seemingly he would also apply this to himself. Okay, so I don't think it's only a kohen, but it makes most sense for a kohen in that context to be the one who would be stringent with himself on this level. So now the Gemara asks, Mimai, you're telling me that we should learn this from our Mishnah, that somebody who prepares food on the level of Tars HaKodesh, so then he can also it can also be Metame, right, to like Kodesh as well. So where do you learn it from? So here we go over to Daf Chof Amud Aleph. And for the Gemara, Midaloi Katoni Behu Ma'ila. Since the Mishnah doesn't teach a separate level regarding them, so therefore we can deduce from here that they are on the level of Kodesh. What do I mean? What does it say in the Mishnah? The Mishnah says that if the clothing of a parush, right? So who they eat their chulin b'tahara. If that clothing, if a person who's careful with truma would touch a kohen that is careful only for truma, would touch a person who's only careful for chulin, right? Let me explain. Sorry, I'm tripping on my words over here. When we say the lowest level is chulin, we say that if you're only careful to eat chulin b'tahara, on what level of tahara? The level of tahara of chulin, right? So then we say if you touch a kohen, right, then that kohen has to now go and immerse himself to be able to eat truma, okay? Because it's a higher level. Now, from the fact that the Mishnah mentions all these different levels, from chulin to teruma, and from teruma to kodesh, and from kodesh to mechatos, and so on and so forth, right? So therefore, the fact that the Mishnah doesn't come along and say what happens if a guy who is careful with chulin touches the garment of somebody who prepared his chulin on the level of Taras HaKodesh, that he would need to go and immerse his hands or wash his hands to be able to reach the level of chulin that were prepared on Taras HaKodesh. I must say that chulin that was prepared on Taras HaKodesh fits into one of the categories already mentioned in this Mishnah. And which category should it fit into? Into the level of Kodesh. So therefore, I'm going to deduce from the Mishnah that when somebody comes along and prepares food al Taras HaKodesh on the level of Kodesh, that if any lower tuma touches it, it can make it impure, even though it's chulin, for somebody who's careful al Taras HaKodesh. Okay, it was a bit confusing. Does everybody understand?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter who is at the highest point, but he's the one.
Let's do Rashi. The first Rashi in Daf Chof. Rashi explains it, right? Hopefully he does a better job than me. Rashi says like this: Loima, this means to say, big day Perushin will take the clothes of the Perushin. Ha'ichlin chuleyan, they eat their chulin b'taharas chulin on the level of tahara of chulin. That's the lowest level, right? Right now. We say about their clothes that it's midras la'ichlei chuleyan b'taharas hakodesh. We should say that their clothes becomes a midras for those who are going to eat their chulin with not the level of chulin, but with the level of taharas hakodesh. So shemamino, from the fact that it doesn't say this, right? The bechlal kodesh hein, they are already included in the Mishnah on the level of kodesh. And so the Tana does teach about kodesh that you have to go and you have to have tefillah. Okay, so that's what we're trying to suggest is the proof that it does have to be held to the standards of kodesh, even though it's still chulin. Beg the Gemara, why are you assuming that because it's not mentioned as a separate category, automatically you should put it into the category of kodesh. Maybe it can go into the level of truma. Maybe it can go into the level of chulin. Why are you assuming that it should go into the level of kodesh? Let's do it inside. V'dilma, perhaps, the reason why it wasn't taught as a separate level regarding them is the truma, is that if they're similar to truma, then hatani truma, the Mishnah has already taught truma. And if they're similar to the level of chulin, hatani lechulin, the Mishnah has already taught chulin. The Tanan, we've learned in a Mishnah, chulin shenasu al taras hakodesh, chulin that were prepared according to the level of tara of kodesh, harehen chulin, they are like ordinary chulin. Now, that's according to one opinion. Rebbe Lezer, but Rebbe Tzadok harehen ketruma. The Rebbe Lezer, the son of Rebbe Tzadok, says they're like truma. So, depending on which opinion you go to, so we'll say not that we learn from the Mishnah that the fact that it's not mentioned as a separate category, you automatically slot it into the category of kodesh. Maybe you slot it into the category of chulin if you go according to the Tanna Kama. Or if you go according to Rebbe Lazar Bar Rebbe Tzadok, then you put them into the category of truma. Don't assume that you put it into the level of chulin. So therefore, we've just now upshlugged the proof that this Rav Mori tried to bring from our Mishnah that that it does have the additional stringencies of kodesh, even though it's chulin. So, yeah. So
Abschlagt. Not everybody speaks Yiddish.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Knocked down.
Abschlag means he knocked down.
Okay.
He knocked down. Sorry about that. So we knocked it off. So we're going to come and say that you misunderstood. We're not trying to bring a proof from the beginning of the Mishnah. We're trying to bring it from the end of the Mishnah, where at the end of the Mishnah we give two specific examples of how somebody, even though he was careful for one level, right, nevertheless, his begotten became tamei for a higher level. And where's this? Elam is Sefer. It's from the end of our Mishnah. That's the proof that the chulin that was prepared, al taras hakodesh, has to be held to the standard of taras hakodesh and therefore can become impure even to the fourth level. Yossi ben Ye'ezer hayachasid shebakuna. We said in our Mishnah that Yossi ben Ye'ezer, the first of the Zugos, he was the most devout when it comes to the Koyanim in terms of remaining conscious and being careful with his hands to always be tahor. And yet his napkin was considered to be tamei through midras for those who ate kodesh. And then we came along and we said there's another person, and that was Yechanan ben Gudgoda al taras hakodesh kol yamav. He always ate his chulin on the level of taras hakodesh v'hoya mitpachtoi midras lechatos, and yet we say that his napkin was considered to be tamei through midras for those who ate chatos. So what's the implication? What is the implication? Lechatos. The implication is that for chatos, his napkin was considered to be midras, but lekodesh. But for those who ate kodesh, it was not. Alma, we see chasova that the Mishnah holds chulin shenas taras hakodesh kekodesh damu, that chulin that was produced according to the Torah standard of kodesh are considered like kodesh, because we say that Rabbi Yochanan, who was always careful to prepare everything al taras hakodesh, it would affect somebody. His would affect somebody who's on the level of chatas, but would not affect somebody who's on the level of kodesh, even though there's a svara that no, there's no svara that you should, because he was careful. But the reason why he doesn't pass it on, he's not metame anybody that's kodesh, is because he has kept all the levels of stringencies required for kodesh, even though it was chulin. So this is a proof that from our Mishnah that we should hold that the chulin that was prepared al taras hakodesh should be held to that high level of stringency. Okay, that is the end of this shtickle Gemara. We're now.
So we have no final determination. You have two different opinions.
No, we said that according to the Sefer, we deduce that a person who prepares chulin al taras hakodesh has that his chulin can pass on tuma to something else. Meaning, usually we say that chulin does not pass on any tuma to anything after a sheni. Okay, it doesn't pass it on after a sheni. If it's chulin, that's it. That it's just up until sheni. However, what about somebody who is careful, right, to eat his chulin b'taharas hakodesh? What happens if somebody's chulin, which became a shlishi l'tuma, touches his chulin? What's the law? Does this person now have to go and wash, or if he becomes touched by somebody who has been made a shlishi l'tuma, right, through chulin, right? Would this person have to now go and wash his hands and prepare himself to eat his chulin on the level of taras hakodesh, or do we say since it's chulin, it doesn't lechatchila even contract past third, right? In other words, the fact that you're careful doesn't mean that if something did contract, it actually contracted, if that makes sense. If there's no car there, there's no car there, right? When you're crossing the street, if there's no car there, there's no car there. What happens if a person is not careful when they're crossing the street, right? And there's no car there, do you still get into an accident? The answer is obviously not. There's no car there. You should have looked. It's true you should have looked. And next time you should look. But the fact is, you didn't get into an accident because there was no car there. If you're telling me that something is chulin, chulin cannot contract tuma beyond sheni, right? Or beyond shlishi. If you're going to come along and say, but nevertheless, I'm careful to the degree that I would have to be careful for kodesh, what happens if you contracted tuma on a shlishi level, right? Do we say that you now have to go and wash yourself again because it contracted, or do we say it didn't contract it, even though you're careful to that level? So we want to prove from the Mishnah that you do have to be careful, and it can contract it, and the Chachamim's laws apply if a person wants to be careful to the level of taras hakodesh. I hope that made sense.
I'm still lost on this.
Yeah.
Well, I thought that chulin can never transfer to the third.
Right. That's what we usually say. So we're asking that if somebody who nonetheless takes upon himself an extra stringency to eat that chulin al taras hakodesh, right? Would we say that it now does pass on for such a person?
Oh, okay.
So
And we say that no.
In the figure that you had shown us, in which you described the different levels.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me see if I can find that. Pull it up 1 second.
But what you're saying is that if I now decided to take upon myself a stringency which was much higher, I basically create another column, so to speak, which is chulin b'taharas hakodesh.
That's correct. That's what we're suggesting.
And then that can transmit
To the third.
down.
That's correct. But only for somebody who is careful to have chulin b'taharas hakodesh. Not for everybody else. For everybody else, it's not a problem.
Okay.
That extra stringency
okay.
is only for that person.
Right, but here we were talking about two different perspectives. One person who holds that chulin does not transmit, and a second perspective that if a person does believe that it does transmit, then that person, then that person has to be careful. So this is what I was asking, is that do we come up with a final determination?
We
Or
can't. Yeah. The final determination seems that from the story that we said about Rabbi Yochanan, that we said that when does he pass on? When does he pass on a midras? It's only to chatos. Why? Why does he pass it on to chatos? Because he's only careful up until Taras HaKodesh. And so the Chachamim's gezerah, that to the level higher, it becomes midras, applies even to Rabbi Yochanan. But what we're saying is that Rabbi Yochanan can only pass it on to a chatas. He's not going to, it's not going to be considered midras to the level of kodesh. Why is it not going to be considered midras to the kodesh? Not because it doesn't apply, but because he's careful. So the fact that the Mishnah says that he can pass it on to Maisa, and we imply from that he cannot pass it on to somebody else who's on the level of Kodesh because he's careful. If he were not to be careful, we assume that he could pass it on. In other words, why did the Gezerah of the Chachamim apply to Rabbi Yochanan? Because he's not careful. He's not careful to eat his chulin b'taras mechatas. He's only careful to eat his chulin b'taharas hakodesh, right? So therefore, he goes along and touches somebody who's only careful, who's trying to go and deal with the mechatos, that he's going to become a midras, and he has to go and deal with it. He has to go and immerse himself in a mikvah. But why? Why? Because Rabbi Yochanan was only careful with his chulin to what? Up to Taras HaKodesh. However, if somebody else was careful with the level of Taras HaKodesh and Rabbi Yochanan touched his clothes, he wouldn't become a midras because he had been careful. Because we say Rabbi Yochanan was always careful to eat chulin, always, all the days of his life on the level of Taras HaKodesh. However, had he not been, we're assuming that it would be possible to transmit that to somebody else's chulin if they were trying to be on the level of Taras HaKodesh. Does that make sense?
okay, let's go on.
Okay. The next, it's already 10:58. Okay, I'll just give you a brief introduction to what's coming tomorrow. And that is that when a person is careful with the level of tahara, like truma and so on, right? So the question is, at what point is your guarding considered to be no good and therefore you become tamei? Do we say that even though somebody was guarding and being very careful, right? However, if he averted his mind even for a moment, then we say it now has become tamei, or do we say it really depends on the circumstances? So let's just deal with the first case, and it'll be a good intro for tomorrow. Amar Rabbi Yonasan ben Elazar. Rabbi Yonasan says, Ben Elazar says, Nafla ma'afartoi hemenu. If somebody has a talis, a shawl that fell from him. Now, Amar l'chaveroi. He said to his friend, Tenali, please give it to me. Unasanalai, and he gave it to him. Tmeya, it's now considered tamei. What's the situation? The situation is his chaver is tahor. He himself is tahor, and his shawl, his talis, fell off him, and he turns around without asking his friend, by the way, are you tahor? Right? He just says, give it to me, right? So we say, because he has now asked somebody to hand something to him, the fact that he himself is not holding it, that is considered to be hesach hadas, and because it's hesach hadas, therefore we come along and we say that it is tameya. So what we see from here is that if you don't have complete concentration on the garment at every moment, then if your Masiach Das averted, and even to the degree of asking somebody else to pick it up for you, which is a slight aversion of your mind because you're not as careful, so therefore, if we say it becomes tamei. Anyway, we'll stop over here. But what we see from all of this is,
Thank you, Rabbi.
no problem.
But then it sounds like both of them are tummy.
No, we're saying that the garment is tamei. We're just talking about whether the garment is
Okay.
tamei. But the point here is, it's really important to concentrate and have kavana when you do things. And we'll pick it up tomorrow, Mr. Hashem.
But
Thank you, Rabbi.
the garment is tame since it fell into the dirt.
No, it doesn't necessarily contract tumah just from hitting the earth, because the something that's the earth is not necessarily mikabel tumah, but a person's hands are, and he can pass it on. So we're saying that the fact that he picked it up, that his hands now, because you averted your mind, it's become tamei again as an extra stringency of the chachamim, not midyaraisa. Okay.
Okay. All
Because
right.
at the end of
Thank
the day,
you.
he's taught. All right. We'll pick up tomorrow. All the best.
Bye, Rabbi.